Let's continue with the story around load shedding and the EFF protest. 87 protesters have been arrested in the past 15 hours for public violence related offences. They're said to have been participating in today's protest action. Now, the arrests have been made by the National Joint Operational and Intelligence Structure. Build One South Africa leader Mmusi Maimane is calling on the SAPS leadership to use the resources deployed today to find the killers of eNCA, Klutter and Thomas Murray, and the mastermind behind Babita Deokaran's murder. He joins me now to speak to us about what he thinks about this particular protest. Mr. Maimane, thank you very much for your time here on eNCA. So you think, they over-resourced this time because of the trauma that was experienced back in July 2021, maybe?
Good morning, and good morning to fellow South Africans. I think today is symptomatic of what has been going on with the state being captured and used for political purposes. Today is a political protest action by the EFF. The deployment of resources and the using of that power indicates the fact that when it suits the government, it is capable of acting. But in fact, when matters of ordinary South Africans, day in, day out, they watch their loved ones being murdered, gangs terrorizing communities, energy being cut off, when those demands are being made by ordinary people, the government is incapable of acting. And so today, symbolically, is equally a show of the fact that this is a government that long has forgotten to take care of its people, and more seriously, that in fact, when it suits it, it is capable of actually doing its job. What we are simply asking for is do your job every day rather than, in fact, on days that suit your own purposes.
And, with regards to so many people reacting in the way that they did, and then you see that today, business is going on as usual. Of course, we know that there is this protest happening, but business is actually going on as usual. So would you say that, government preempted a bit much?
No, I think it also shows the fact that actually most citizens want this country to be built. It's why we are involved in the court action right now, happening in the Gauteng North High Court, where ultimately we've asked the government to submit their plans. We are holding them accountable as it pertains to load shedding. It demonstrates that there's a legal action being on the table, and we can be able to build this country. Our people are beyond protest. They are sitting at home now saying, I actually want to find a job. I want a hospital that works, a school that is open. So if we elect people into government, best they have the capability of being able to deliver against those things. They can't just do it when the EFF threatens them on one day, because I can assure you, come tomorrow and the day after, we'll be looking at crime stats where 70 of our fellow countrymen are being murdered daily, and those kinds of indications showing the fact that when actually it's away from the cameras and the ordinary life of people continues, the government is nowhere to be seen. We cannot privatize the state for political purposes. We need a government that works every day, all the time, for the people. And so this is the struggle that we must also continue to fight. And that's why I'm saying there cannot be overuse of force, neither there can be abuse of people by saying, let's send them out to the streets. Let's follow the legal channels, which is what the court we are doing now. Let's implement a plan to make sure we have a government that's accountable and can keep the lights on. And we will remove this government through an electoral process which our constitution prescribes come next year's election.
I do want to speak more about this court case against NERSA that you have filed. And I mean, Build One South Africa becomes, one of the many organizations and political parties that are taking NERSA and some of them actually government to court around load shedding. This is something that, of course, a lot of South Africans support in terms of the demands by the EFF and other organizations. But talk to me about what you've been viewing so far. I don't know if you've driven around, but when I was on my way to work, businesses in the suburbs are operating as normal. There's no roads that are being blockaded, etc. And it's in fact the poor people in the townships that have had to close their shops. And those are the people that, today is supposed to be about. I don't know if I'm wrong.
No, and certainly it will always be such that actions such as this one deal the harshest blow against citizens who have no mechanism of protecting themselves against it. We saw it in the riots in last year in July, or a number of years ago, where ultimately It's the poor that suffer. We live in a dual country. We live in a country where there are some citizens who are able to protect themselves against the effects of a malfunctioning state. And then those who are vulnerable, which happen to be over 50% of our citizens who live below the upper poverty line. Those are the citizens that get severely impacted by a time like this. It's where the jobs are lost. It's where the schools don't function when there's load shedding. It's where ultimately where healthcare facilities don't work. So when we talk about building, this is the point I'm trying to make, beyond protest, we really reflect on it as a function of going, actually, when we build infrastructure, that's what we need to do. That's why I'm very strong, even in our 10-point plan, to say, let's include township economic zones so that we can stimulate that economy. So today, my reflections on the protest are because it lacks broad buy-in by society. There are no religious bodies that are involved. Taxi associations are not on board. Civil society largely is not in place because South Africans in their broader numbers recognize that those who are going to be adversely affected are the poor, and what this country desperately needs is actually more building than protest.
All right, now talk to me about NERSA and the court case thereof and this 18% tariff hike that actually is looming. April is coming and South Africans are going to be forced to pay for electricity that we essentially don't get on a daily basis, Mr. Maimane. That's our reality. But the president, at some point, I think maybe he just wanted to be popular. I don't know about his statement when he said he's going to speak to NERSA, tell them to rethink this. And of course, the court said you cannot do that because, this is something, if you want to reverse that, you'd have to come to court to be able to reverse that. NERSA doesn't just decide not to implement these tariff hikes. So talk to me about some of your arguments in this particular case.
Well, our broad argument sits on this fact, is that if you grant NERSA 18%, you are adding to the cost of living for the people of this country. Secondly, to your point that we're not getting the electricity, but worse than that, key sectors of the economy are not being augmented. There's no plan to end load shedding. So schools don't have alternative power, healthcare facilities don't have alternative power, police stations don't have alternative power. So not only are you bailing out corruption that's occurring at Eskom as an ordinary person, you are also funding a service that puts your constitutional rights at risk. So that's why we are in court today. We are saying let the government be held accountable for failing to provide for constitutional rights. Let us halt this 18% because it's not going to deliver what we want. And ultimately, as per responses that were made by Mr. De Ruyter, who was the CEO of Eskom, and the government itself, is that actually they must come and account and deal with corruption rather than, in fact, holding us ransom by asking us to pay for corruption that is taking place at Eskom. Because that's all it is. It's 18% to underwrite all the looting that is taking place and was taking place. And it tells us again that we are actually the funders of state capture and the ones being penalized for it.
Absolutely. Our constitutional rights are being infringed upon, and I think a lot of people worry more about those in poor communities who won't be able to afford to buy solar, etc. Mr. Maimane, thank you very much. Always a pleasure speaking to you. Build One South Africa leader Mmusi Maimane.